In the silver shadows of the urban jungle, the truth is often a matter of perspective and the angle of light. We follow the paths of those who walk between worlds to find the stories the light is too bright to see. Click subscribe now and find what is hidden.
They let me go. I had just reorganized the entire Osaka correspondence folder. 14 years of emails. Every thread color-coded, every attachment renamed with the date and the contact's name and the subject matter, because that's what you do when you're the only person in the building who actually understands what the other side is saying. Not just the words, the meaning behind the words, the pauses, the formal phrasing that isn't really formal. It's just the way you say, "We are unhappy," without ever saying it. I had a sticky note on my monitor that said, "When they go quiet, that's the conversation." Nobody else knew what that meant. That was fine. I was the one who needed to know. My name is Serena. I spent 14 years at a mid-sized manufacturing company in Ohio, the kind of place that makes parts for larger things, the kind of company most people drive past and never think about. We supply precision components to a network of industrial clients, and our single most important relationship, the one that kept the lights on, kept the bonuses flowing, kept my boss's boss smiling at the quarterly meetings, was with a manufacturing group based in Osaka, Japan. I built that relationship. Not inherited it, not stumbled into it. Built it. I started there at 29, fresh out of a graduate program in international business, speaking functional Japanese that I had been quietly perfecting since college because I had a professor who told me once that the rarest skill in American business isn't leadership or strategy or finance. It's the ability to sit in a room with someone from a completely different culture and actually understand what they're not saying. I never forgot that. My first year, I was basically an assistant. I scheduled calls. I formatted reports. I sat in on conference calls and took notes while the senior VP talked too loudly and used idioms that our interpreter visibly struggled with. Because idioms don't translate, they never translate, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something. By year 3, I was running the correspondence myself. By year 5, I was flying to Osaka twice a year and having dinners that were more important than any contract clause, because in Japanese business culture, the relationship is the contract. The piece of paper is secondary. The trust is primary. And trust is built at dinner tables, not conference rooms. The relationship I had with the senior director at our Osaka partner, a man I'll call my counterpart, because that's the closest English gets to what he was, took 7 years to develop into something real. Something where he would occasionally say things to me, carefully, quietly, that he would never put in writing. Small warnings, gentle redirections. The timeline feels ambitious, Serena-san. That meant you will not make this deadline. Tell your CEO now, not later. We have been reviewing the terms with great care. That meant something in the contract is bothering us and we need more time. Do not push. I kept a private document on my laptop titled Translation Notes that had nothing to do with language. It was a record of every subtext I had decoded over 14 years, 112 entries. I printed it out once, just to see how thick it was. I never showed it to anyone. It was mine. The new CEO arrived in March. I want to be precise about this because the timeline matters. He arrived in March, I was gone by June, and by October, the Osaka relationship, the $12 million annual contract that had renewed every year for 11 years without a single lapse, was effectively dead. 90 days. That's how long it took. He came in from a tech company on the West Coast, which should have been a warning sign to anyone paying attention, because the cultures are genuinely different. Not better or worse, different. Tech moves fast and celebrates disruption and treats every existing process as a legacy problem to be solved. Manufacturing moves differently, especially international manufacturing. Especially with Japanese partners who have been doing business the same careful relationship-first way for decades and see no particular reason to change. He walked through the office his first week with an energy I can only describe as acquisitive, like he was cataloging things. What's this? What's that? Why do we do it this way? Which, fine. New leadership asks questions. That's normal. But there's a difference between curiosity and condescension, and by week 2, I could hear it in the way he talked about the Osaka relationship. So we have this one supplier we're basically dependent on, he said in an all hands. That's a single point of failure. We need to diversify. I raised my hand. I said respectfully that the Osaka relationship wasn't just a supplier arrangement. It was a partnership built over more than a decade, with a level of customization and quality control that would take years to replicate elsewhere. I said that diversification was a reasonable long-term goal, but that any short-term disruption to that relationship could have serious consequences. He looked at me like I had suggested we communicate by carrier pigeon. We have translation software for a reason, he said. We don't need to be this dependent on any one person's language skills. I smiled and sat down and wrote in my notebook, "Clock is ticking. The thing about being irreplaceable is that the people around you almost never know it until you're gone. It's not arrogance to say that. It's just a particular kind of loneliness." I had tried over the years to document what I knew. I had written briefing memos about the Osaka relationship. I had flanked communication protocols in our company handbook. Things like, do not send follow-up emails within 48 hours of a major proposal. Give them space. Silence is not stalling. Silence is deliberation. Things like, avoid the phrase moving forward in correspondence. It implies the previous discussion was a problem to be moved past. Things like, our counterpart's title translates loosely to general manager, but functionally he operates as a relationship steward. Decisions flow through him, not around him. Nobody read the memos. I know because I asked once. And my then boss smiled and said they were very thorough in the tone of voice people use when they mean I skimmed the first paragraph. So when the new CEO decided to streamline the international communications process, which meant cutting my role in routing all Osaka correspondence through an automated translation platform and a junior coordinator who had never left the country, I was not entirely surprised. I was devastated, but I was not surprised. The coordinator, who I'll call my replacement, was 24 years old and genuinely trying her best. That part is important. She wasn't the problem. She was handed an impossible situation by someone who didn't understand what he was asking her to do, and she did what any reasonable 24-year-old would do. She used the tools available to her and hoped for the best. The tools available to her were a translation app and 2 weeks of email templates I had written before I left. I left on a Friday. They gave me a small going-away cake with my name spelled wrong on the frosting. I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. Not crying exactly, just recalibrating. 14 years is a long time to be somewhere. You don't just stop being that person on a Friday afternoon because someone handed you a severance packet and a cake. I thought about my counterpart in Osaka. I thought about the dinner we'd had in February, just 4 months earlier, at a small restaurant near their office where they brought out a dish I'd mentioned once, 2 years prior, that I had liked. He had remembered. That's the kind of partner they were. I wondered if anyone would think to tell him I was leaving. I found out later that nobody did. I spent the summer doing something I had been putting off for years. I registered my own consulting firm, Serena Nakashima Consulting, my mother's maiden name in the middle, because she was the one who had first put a Japanese grammar book in my hands when I was 17, after a family trip that changed the way I understood the world. I had one client by August, a small aerospace components firm in Indiana that was trying to open a dialogue with a supplier in Nagoya. I flew out, sat across a table, had a conversation, came home and wrote them a 12-page memo on relationship dynamics and communication protocols. They looked at me like I'd handed them a treasure map. I charged them accordingly. I was building something, slowly, carefully, the way you build things that last. Meanwhile, from what I was hearing through former colleagues, and people talk, they always talk, especially when things are going badly, the Osaka situation was deteriorating in ways that nobody at the company fully understood because the deterioration wasn't happening loudly. It wasn't happening in angry emails or canceled calls. It was happening in silence. Here is what I understood, and what no one at that company understood after I left. In Japanese business culture, silence is not neutral. It is communicative. When a Japanese business partner goes quiet, stops responding quickly, sends brief acknowledgments instead of substantive replies, stops asking clarifying questions, they are telling you something. They are saying, we are unhappy, and we are deciding what to do about it. The correct response to that silence is not to flood the inbox. It is not to send follow-ups every 48 hours asking if everything is okay. It is definitely not to schedule a call and open with, hey, we just want to make sure we're all on the same page. But that is exactly what happened. The automated translation platform, I later learned, had several notable quirks. One of them involved the Japanese concept of miwaku, roughly translated as causing inconvenience or burden to others, which is a deeply culturally weighted concept. In the correspondence, a phrase that my counterpart had used to gently indicate that the new communication style was creating friction had been rendered by the software as a relatively neutral comment about scheduling complications. It wasn't about scheduling. The coordinator, working from that translation, sent back a chipper response about how they were happy to adjust the meeting times and offered 3 alternatives. My counterpart did not respond for 11 days. 11 days. To anyone who understood the context, that was a 5-alarm fire. To the new CEO who checked in with the coordinator and was told, "We're waiting to hear back," it was a minor administrative delay. Then there was the matter of the proposal letter. The new CEO decided sometime in August that it was time to renegotiate the contract terms. Specifically, he wanted to push for a 15% cost reduction. He dictated a letter. The coordinator ran it through the translation platform and sent it. The letter, as received by the Osaka team, contained several issues. The first was a salutation that used the wrong honorific for my counterpart's position. Not dramatically wrong, just slightly off, in the way that suggests you don't know exactly who you're addressing. In a relationship of 11 years, that registers. The second was a phrase in the second paragraph that the translation software rendered as something closer to, "We believe the current arrangement no longer reflects fair value," which, depending on interpretation, implies that the Osaka side has been overcharging. In context, in that relationship, in that culture, that is not a negotiating position. That is an accusation. The third issue was the closing. The CEO had ended his dictated letter with "looking forward to growing together." The software translated the sentiment but missed the specific phrasing that would have made it land correctly in formal Japanese business correspondence. Instead, it came across as something closer to a generic commercial slogan, the kind of thing you'd see on a shipping box. My counterpart sent back a 2-sentence reply. In Japanese, it said, and I'm translating carefully here, because the English doesn't quite carry all of it, something like, "Thank you for your letter. We will consult internally and be in touch." To the coordinator, who ran it through the translation platform, it read as, "Thank you for your letter. We'll be in touch." To me, if I had seen it, it would have read as, "The relationship is in serious trouble, and we are now deciding whether to end it." Those are not the same message. I found out what happened next from 2 sources, a former colleague who still worked in operations, and, eventually, from my counterpart himself. In September, the Osaka team stopped responding to meeting requests entirely. Not declined. Just didn't respond. The coordinator escalated to the CEO, who decided the solution was to fly to Osaka unannounced and have a direct conversation. He did not ask anyone whether this was a good idea. He flew to Osaka. He arrived at their offices without a confirmed appointment, which in that context communicates something specific, either profound disrespect or profound desperation, and neither is a good look. The receptionist was gracious. The junior staff were gracious. My counterpart was unavailable. He waited 2 hours. Then he flew home. Back in Ohio, he called a meeting and told the team that the Osaka relationship was at an impasse and they needed to begin identifying alternative suppliers. He said it like it was a strategic pivot, like it was something he had decided. He had not decided it. It had happened to him gradually, over 4 months, in a language he didn't speak and a cultural register he had never learned to read. The $12 million contract did not renew. I got the call in October, not from the CEO, from the head of operations, someone I had worked with for years, someone I genuinely liked, someone who had the decency to sound embarrassed when he called. He said they were reassessing the Osaka situation and wondered if I might be willing to consult. I was standing in my kitchen, making coffee, and I let the silence sit for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then I said calmly, "Tell me what's happened." He told me. Not all of it. I don't think he knew all of it, but enough. The letter, the silence, the visit, the non-renewal. I wrote some notes on the back of an envelope while he talked. Old habit. When he was done, I said, "I'd be happy to take a look at the situation. My consulting rate is $350 an hour, and for a project of this scope, I'd need a minimum engagement of 40 hours billed up front." He paused. I waited. He started. "That's what it costs," I said pleasantly. "I'm also in conversations with a few other clients right now, so if timing is a concern, I'd want to get something signed by end of week." He said he'd have to check with the CEO. I said, "Of course." I finished making my coffee. He called back in 2 hours. They agreed to the terms. I want to be clear about what I was willing to do and what I was not. I was willing to consult, to assess the damage, to advise on a path forward. I was not willing to pretend the situation was recoverable if it wasn't. And I was not going to recommend solutions that required me to go back to working for them full time, because I had built something of my own now, and I wasn't going to set it down. My first call with them was a 2-hour assessment. I reviewed every piece of correspondence from June forward. I read the proposal letter. I read the 2-sentence reply from my counterpart. Then I sat with the CEO on a video call because I wasn't driving to that office, and I told him directly what had happened. The letter implied they were overcharging you, I said. That's not a negotiating position in that relationship. That's an insult. He started to explain what he had meant to say. I let him finish. What you meant isn't relevant, I said. What they received is what matters. And what they received in the context of a relationship your company spent 11 years building was a suggestion that they had been taking advantage of you. He was quiet for a moment. So it's a misunderstanding, he said. We can clarify it. It's more than a misunderstanding, I said. You've been reading their silence as patience. It's not patience. It's a verdict that's being deliberated. Another pause. What's the verdict? He asked. I don't know yet, I said, but I know how to find out. I reached out to my counterpart directly, not through the company channels, personally from my own email, the one he had written to me at for years. I wrote in Japanese. I did not apologize on behalf of the company. That was not mine to offer. I wrote simply as myself. I said that I had heard there had been some difficulties in the recent correspondence. I said that I was now working independently, and that I had a great deal of respect for the relationship we had built over the years, and that if he was willing to have a conversation, I would be glad to find a time that worked for him. I closed it properly. The right honorifics. The right phrasing for the relationship level we had established over 14 years. He replied in 4 hours. To put that in context, the company had been waiting weeks for replies. He wrote back to me in 4 hours. He said, again translating carefully, that he was pleased to hear from me and that yes, he thought a conversation would be valuable. We spoke the following Thursday. He was measured, careful, genuinely kind, the way he always was. But he was also honest with me in a way he clearly had not felt comfortable being with anyone at the company since I left. The letter had caused real damage. Not because the cost reduction request was unreasonable, cost pressures are a fact of business. He understood that, but because of how it had arrived. The framing. The honorific. The slogan at the end. Taken together, it had communicated a carelessness that was difficult to reconcile with 11 years of what they had experienced as a genuine partnership. The unannounced visit, he said with characteristic restraint, had been unexpected. I said I understood, and that I was sorry he had experienced that. He said it was a complicated situation. I agreed that it was. Then I said, I want to be transparent with you. I'm consulting for the company now, but I'm also building my own practice. If there's a path to repairing this relationship, I will help find it. And if at any point your team would benefit from having someone who understands both sides of this work, I'd welcome that conversation. There was a pause. Then he said carefully, we appreciate your transparency, Serena-san. I wrote in my notebook, the door is open. Here's what happened over the next 6 weeks. I helped the company draft a response to the Osaka team that addressed, without being explicit about it, each of the points of friction that had accumulated since June. The right tone, the right acknowledgement of the relationship's history. A modest, face-saving reframing of the cost discussion, not abandoning the request, but situating it in the context of shared long-term growth rather than a unilateral demand. The letter took 3 drafts. I billed for every hour. My counterpart's team received it and responded with a request for a formal meeting, not a call, a meeting, in person, Osaka. The CEO, to his credit, asked me what that meant. It means they're deciding whether to keep you, I said. The meeting isn't the decision. It's the process of making the decision. You don't ask for an in-person meeting to end a relationship. You just end it. The fact that they're asking you to come means there's still something to save. What do I do when I get there? He asked. I billed another 4 hours to write him a prep document. I thought about it for a long time before I wrote it because there's a version of that document that's honest and a version that flatters him. And I wrote the honest one. I told him what not to say. I told him what topics to let breathe instead of filling. I told him that if there was silence in the room, to let it be silent. That silence was not his to fill. I don't know exactly what happened in that room in Osaka because I wasn't there, but I know that my counterpart's team agreed to a provisional contract extension, a 6-month trial, with a renegotiated rate structure that was a 7% reduction instead of 15%, half of what the CEO wanted, all of what the relationship could bear. He came back and told me it was a partial win. I told him it was a full save. He didn't entirely understand the distinction, but I'd stopped needing him to understand things by then. What I didn't tell him, what I didn't tell anyone at the company, was that during my conversations with my counterpart, he had asked me something. He had asked whether my consulting practice worked with Japanese partners on a broader basis, whether I helped other American companies build and maintain those relationships. I said yes. He said that there were, as it happened, 2 other companies in their industrial network that had expressed interest in finding American partners in our sector. Companies that had struggled, as so many did, with the gap between what they communicated and what was understood. He said that if I were interested, he would be happy to make an introduction. I said I would be very grateful for that. We ended the call the way we always ended our calls, carefully, warmly, with the kind of phrasing that in English would sound overly formal, but in context meant something close to, "I'm glad we're still doing this together." I closed my laptop. I looked at the sticky note. I had moved from my old office monitor to my home office monitor because some things you carry with you. When they go quiet, that's the conversation. The company I used to work for almost lost everything because they didn't know how to listen to silence. I spent 14 years learning to hear it. That skill didn't belong to them. It never did. It was mine. It still is. And now I'm building something with it carefully, quietly, the way things are built to last. My counterpart's introductions led to 2 new client engagements by the end of that year. Neither company had ever heard of the place I used to work. They found me because a man in Osaka remembered a conversation from 7 years ago and thought, "She is someone who understands." That's the whole story, really. That's always been the whole story. I've thought a lot about what actually went wrong at that company. Not the letter, not the unannounced visit, not even the translation software. What went wrong was that someone decided expertise was a cost center instead of a foundation. And once you believe that, you will make 100 small decisions that each seem reasonable on their own, and together they will take something that took years to build and quietly destroy it in 90 days. That's the part that doesn't show up on any balance sheet until it's too late. I spent 14 years learning to hear what wasn't being said. That's not a skill you download. It's not something a platform replicates because it can convert characters from one alphabet to another. Language is the surface. What's underneath it? The history, the relationship, the accumulated trust of 1,000 careful interactions. That's the thing that actually holds the deal together. And you only understand that if you've been in the room. Not reading about the room. Not summarizing the room. Actually in it, watching, listening, adjusting. My counterpart went quiet for 11 days and nobody noticed it was a warning. That's not a technology failure. That's a wisdom failure. And wisdom, I've come to believe, is the thing that takes the longest to build and the fastest to dismiss, because it's quiet and it doesn't come with a price tag attached. There's something I keep coming back to. The head of operations called me. Not the CEO, not HR, not anyone with authority, because he knew. He knew, in whatever way people know things they haven't fully articulated, that what had been lost wasn't a process or a software subscription. It was a person who had spent years becoming irreplaceable. And irreplaceable things, when you lose them, don't send you an invoice right away. They just go quiet. And then one day you look up and the silence has been the answer the whole time. I don't think the CEO was a bad person. I think he was someone who had been rewarded his entire career for moving fast and optimizing costs and trusting tools over people, and it had worked until it didn't. That's a particular kind of professional tragedy, not malice, just a deeply limited map of the world. He walked into a relationship built on 14 years of context, and he couldn't see it because he had never learned to look for that kind of thing. What I want to say, if anyone watching this has ever been in my position, overlooked, replaced, handed a poorly spelled cake on a Friday, is that the work you do to build real expertise is never wasted. It doesn't belong to the company that dismisses it. It belongs to you. It goes with you. It opens doors that the people who let you go don't even know exist. I left that building with a half-warm latte and 14 years of knowledge they couldn't put in a drop-down menu. My counterpart remembered me because I had always shown up as exactly who I was, not a job title, not a process, a person who paid attention. That's the thing worth building, not a career at any one place. The capacity to understand, deeply, carefully, across every barrier that makes understanding hard. That capacity is yours. Keep building it.